A minor crash happens on the M25. A 21-year-old man gets out of his van, and moments later he is stabbed to death in front of his teenage fiancée. The killer gets back into the vehicle and disappears. What followed was an international manhunt and an investigation that uncovered the identity of one of Britain's most notorious criminals. This is the story of the murder of Stephen Cameron. It was May 1996. Stephen Cameron was traveling towards London on the M25 with his fiancée, 17-year-old Danielle Cable. The couple were traveling in a Bedford Rascal van when they became involved in a minor collision with a dark green Land Rover Discovery. It happened on a slip road near Swanley in Kent. The driver of the Land Rover was Kenneth Noye. He got out of his vehicle, approached Stephen and Danielle, and pulled out a knife. Noye stabbed Stephen and fled the scene, leaving the young man seriously injured at the side of the road. Stephen was taken to hospital, but for the time his parents, Ken and Tony Cameron, arrived, it was too late. Noye, meanwhile, had disappeared and police launched an international hunt. Initially, police were not even publicly looking for him under his real name. Early appeals identified a man called Anthony Francis. That turned out to be a false identity used by Noye. Investigators eventually traced the Land Rover involved in the crash. It had been unloaded in Kyrenia, Cyprus in July 1996. That discovery helped police establish the true identity of the man they were looking for, and investigators soon found that this was no ordinary road rage suspect. Noye had a long criminal history. He was born in Bexley Heath and had been involved in crime from a young age. He spent time in Borsal after being convicted over stolen bicycles. As an adult, he developed connections within London's criminal underworld and links to police officers. Noye had acted as a police informer for years and had contacts within the Metropolitan Police. He was also involved in handling some stolen gold from Heathrow Airport and even stabbed a police officer who was part of a police surveillance operation outside his home. Remarkably, Noye was acquitted of the police officer's murder after successfully arguing self-defense. He was instead convicted in 1986 for handling stolen gold and conspiring to evade VAT. He was sentenced to 14 years in prison and released in 1999. So when Stephen was killed in May 1996, Noye wasn't simply a man involved in a random road dispute. He was a convicted criminal with a history of organized crime connections, violence, and previous involvement with the police. And now he was wanted for murder. Eventually, police were able to trace Noye to Spain. He was found in the resort of Barbate around 2 years after Stephen's murder. Noye finally stood trial in April 2000. The jury found him guilty of murdering Stephen Cameron by a majority of 11-1, and he was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 16 years. But the case would return to the headlines years later. On the 6th of June 2019, Kenneth Noye was released from prison. The parole board had concluded that he was suitable to return to the community. He was released on life license, meaning he remained subject to strict conditions. These included living at a designated address, reporting for supervision, and complying with restrictions on his contacts, activities, residence, and exclusion zones. If he breached his license conditions and was considered to pose an increased risk, he could be recalled to prison. The murder of Stephen Cameron is remembered as one of the most shocking incidents to begin with something so ordinary, a crash in the M25.